So in terms of another really astonishing work from 2019 by Ed Young, it has a very paradoxical title. It's called Hero. And it's an image of Superman, but the Superman is the artist, slightly pot-bellied, forgive me, Ed, without the chiseled abs, one associates to that particular figure. This is all deliberate because what it is that Ed Young is trying to do, he's trying to actually set up the idea of what defines heroism in an era that is deeply unheroic. So it's not that he's not setting up the antihero to the hero. He's setting up the fallibility of the unheroic. And there he is, slightly slumped, his hands are cusped, is trying to light a cigarette, and a very specific cigarette, the Marlboro. Now, the Marlboro Man, the great Hank, as you know, died of cancer. So the interesting fragility of being the figurehead for Marlboro and dying of the very product that you're actually advertising shows you the lethal loop of consumerism. And the other thing that is fascinating about that particular work is that it is, if I remember correctly, it's a combination of silicon paint, cotton, rubber, and human hair. I mean, Ed Young's own hair, which was shaved from his body and then accumulated and then repositioned in various parts of his body. So what we're dealing with here is the idea, an eerie and uncanny simulation or copy of the actual artist, because it's life-size, and it looks exactly, strikingly like Ed. It's the sort of thing you associate with Madame Tussauds, with wax dummies, for example. But Ed's been doing this for a number of years. He's been using various scales of his own body. He's played with it, and he's tried to point to what it is that defines our mortality. So if Mahal is examining a supernatural plane, what it is that Ed Young is doing is it is dragging us very much into a mortal coil. Now, this is very much the world that Ed operates in. His idea is not to transfigure life, but to actually examine its disfigurement, why we are the way we are. And one of the core thematics of Hero, this non-heroic image, is that it's very much about white emasculation. Now, we know that this is a strong thematic in recent years because, of course, it's the examination of patriarchy, of white power, of white mythology. And what he's trying to do is perform the fragility of it. Not to denounce it, but to dramatize it, so that we examine things better. I think we know and understand things better when they're performed rather than when we're told this is right and this is wrong. Moral lessons are incredibly dull and pedantic and boring, and worse, they're hurtful because they're reactive. So what we need to do is find ways to actually deal with the fragilities of power in and of itself, to understand why power needs to be understood in that way in order to have any significance. Now, as the great French philosopher Michel Foucault said, power and truth are always embattled. So in other words, the idea of white male power was never something that was sacrosanct or absolute. It constructed itself as that, as does all advertising. It succeeded over centuries simply because of the power of the brand, until it hit a point when suddenly it no longer became as inviolable or as absolute as it was thought to be. In other words, white mythology, white power suddenly hit a dead end. This is the moment we're living in right now. We're living in a moment of revisionism, a moment when we are reevaluating who has authority, who has the right to authority. We are also, for example, working towards a much more complex, diversified identity politics. We are altering staffing in museums. We are reconditioning or rethinking the art canon, hence the intensive integration and re-evaluation of the importance of women artists, of black artists, and how these are reintegrating itself into a new understanding of the contemporary moment of art. Now, Ed Young, as a white South African male, is not lamenting the fact that he is being sidelined. This is one of the major mistakes people actually think. They think that white emasculation is about the denial of power. What it is actually about is the performance of a radical change in power politics. And I think in that regard, you then see the strength of what Ed Young is doing in manifesting the compromise of white power, is examining exactly the justice of this, rather than apologizing for it or lamenting its loss. And this is what makes him a highly enabling and very potent political figure at this contemporary moment in South African art.